Welcome to this week's episode of the Vulnerability Rocks podcast. And this week I have my guest, Alex. And Alex is the co-founder of Be Sober, which is a community interested company that connects and supports people who want to live alcohol free. She is also a volunteer for NACOA and a speaker and a message board mentor to support children of alcoholic parents, something which is really close to her heart from her own childhood experiences of living with an alcoholic parent. Now, Alex has been on a journey of her own, which we're going to unpick and unravel and discover together today. She has been wonderful to me through some recent challenging experiences in my own life, and I've really connected with her, and I'm really excited for you to get to know her too. So without further ado, we will get into the podcast. Welcome, Alex. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm really good, actually. Thank you, Emma. Apart from the fact that we're still locked down and I'm in the same boat as everybody else in the UK. But yeah, I'm good. I'm really good.
Let's talk about that for a minute, though. Like, how is that? Because it's just been going on forever, right? Like for everyone. We're stuck in this perpetual state of when's it going to end?
Yeah, I think the hardest thing for me, and I've just actually been speaking about it, is my children, the impact it's having on their mental health, and being able to feel that from them and being helpless to do anything about it, because we're a really open family. We talk through problems, we talk through issues, but that's all it is at the end of the day, is talking. And you can't get out and get them with their friends and get them socializing and get them doing, there's no division between home and school. So, you know, I'm not only being mum, I'm also trying to be teacher, which is my previous profession, but not their teacher, and they're not used to that side. So yeah, and it's just not being able to see any end to it. That's the hardest thing for them, and therefore it's the hardest thing for me. So yeah. Hard. But it's okay, you know. It's still very much a first world problem to me, that, and we just muddle through.
Yeah, it's I was talking to a friend the other day actually, just about how it's difficult enough for adults who are trying to be these multi-role people in their children's lives and these young people's lives. As adults, we are able to have like more insight, more awareness, more otherworldly experiences to help us kind of go, but we can be okay and we can muddle through, and, you know, we get through this time. And I just think for young people, it's hard, right? Because they're still in that developing mindset of working out what the world even is. And now this happens, and it's sort of for a really prolonged time. So I'm really feeling for the young people. Like, I'm feeling for the parents, because they're having to do 1,000,001 things and wear another 100 hats on top of the hats they have to wear.
Yeah.
And then the kids are also doing their best. Like, everyone's just doing their best in a really tough time.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that, you know, I always mention on anything I speak on is, you know, that I can't help but have empathy and feeling for the children that don't have nice family homes, that don't have the protection and the warmth and the safety of their home. You know, those that under a normal everyday basis go to school and actually escape for a little while and live kind of a little daydream in school and don't have to face the reality. It does make me really concerned, thinking, you know, there's so many children living where there's alcohol, and, you know, and I know that's what we're going to talk about today, but it's horrific. You know, I can't picture what lockdown would have been like when I was a little girl. It's horrific.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, we're gonna talk and unpack that a little bit more together, and let our listeners get to know you more. You know, and I want them. I've been getting to know you, and I'd love them to get to know you too. So, can we start by who's Alex, and, you know, what you're doing now? So let's start with like the coaching bit, like what you're doing now, and then we'll kind of go back and talk about how you arrived here and what brought you to what you do now.
Yeah, so I come under a very broad category of life coaching, and it didn't feel right. It didn't sit with me right. And, you know, I had conversations with you about this, and I just felt that doesn't quite feel that I'm a life coach. I do more than that. And that's not undermining that profession. It was just, I do more than that. I do something else. And I came to the realization, with help and input from several people, and yourself included, that what I actually am is somebody who's realigning people with their authentic selves and their values. So I actually named myself a realignment coach. And I think that serves me really well, because it brings in the work that I'm doing to allow people recovery from alcohol and drugs. It brings in the resilience building that I like to do with people who've been through traumatic experiences. And it does bring them back to finding out who they are and living by those values. So that's what I do in terms of coaching. And the other side of it is the Be Sober work that I do, which is still coaching, but I work with two other co-founders of an organisation called Be Sober, which is all about helping people to stay sober when they want a sober lifestyle, whether that be because they associate with being alcoholic or whether they just want to take a break.
Yeah. And Be Sober is obviously how I got introduced to you, first. And it's a great space because it isn't just about being an alcoholic. It's if we are just in a space where we think that we need to step out of that arena for a bit as well, right? So it's a really supportive space for choosing to be alcohol free, however alcohol may or may not be showing up for you in your life, right? And I love the content that comes out, and I've shared it with people as well, and I know that it's helped people. So it's good what you're doing, you know.
Yeah, we do get told quite a lot that not only are we, you know, like you get platforms that say come and join our safe space, but then it's not always multidimensional. It's kind of saying it and not living by it. And the feedback that we tend to get is you provide that safe arena, you have that safe arena, we feel safe, we feel a belonging, we feel a community. So we've really achieved what we wanted to achieve, which was bringing together like-minded people to form a supportive community and a network of friends. So that's been our main aim, and that's what we've achieved. So yeah, really pleased with that.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because even whether you define yourself as an alcoholic or not, anybody that goes out and has a drink at the weekend, when you decide to step out of that social setting and to step into something new, as you know, I haven't had a drink for nearly 2 years, and I wasn't an alcoholic, but it certainly wasn't helping my mental health.
Yeah.
I felt it afterwards. And when I decided to really not drink again, and not as a self-punishment, because actually I feel better, it is a little bit like, oh, so what do we do socially next? Right?
Yeah.
Because it is everywhere, and you sort of feel like everyone's like, oh, well, you know, when you want to come and have a drink, come and have a drink, you know, kind of thing, or oh, you're being a bit boring, and all of that. And it's this social kind of pressure that I think can kind of make someone go back to doing it for social kind of pressure rather than sticking to what they want to do. Like me, for example, not because I had a drink problem, but because actually it made me feel more anxious. It made me feel more down, and living with bipolar, it just wasn't helpful for me, right? And seeing the posts that come through from Be Sober kind of show you like, actually, there is social life beyond having a drink, and life can be different. And okay, we're not going to be swinging from the chandeliers at the pub or whatever, but you can still go and have a good time and have fun. And that's what I loved about the content when I first started seeing it, because I hear it and, you know, they're like, oh, I don't really want to have a drink, but, you know, everyone's kind of putting on the pressure, and it's what we do after work. And that social pressure is just there, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's very, very real. And for some people who have no support, you know, I'm really lucky. My husband doesn't drink either, and he never really had any issue with drink. I mean, it would be literally me bringing home cans of beer so that I could justify my wine drinking. He didn't bother. But for people who don't have the same support or a network of sober friends, it can be a really lonely place when you step out of it. Like you say, you know, what do I do now? What, you know, what's my identity without alcohol? Because we associate our, you know, for me, it was, oh, I'm the life and soul of the party. I'm fun. I'm the clown. I'm this, you know, and all of those things. When I took alcohol away, actually, I stepped back and thought, I'm not even that person. So it's a huge journey once you stop drinking and that you've got over the kind of physical addiction bit that you didn't realize was there. Then comes this period of discovery, which is really daunting and really scary. And doing that in a safe community where you've got other people doing the same is the only way to stay sober, in my opinion. There's many reasons and many ways and methods, but connection, they say, is the opposite of addiction. And now I understand that term.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would say that community and connection aspects, no matter what big experience or thing you're trying to overcome, is critical to a long-term recovery, a long-term stable outcome for going through a big change. Because when you feel alone, you just get lost.
Yeah, and often when you feel alone, you start to act like you're alone. So it might not be the case, you might be surrounded by people, but if they're not on a level and they don't understand and have compassion or any form of empathy for your journey, they can't get down in that space with you. So you are alone. Doesn't matter how many people are around you, you are alone. And it's funny that, because I was talking about, and again, we may go on to this, but talking about the period of time where I'd had my miscarriages and I was surrounded by loving family members and friends and everybody, I had so many people, but I'd never been lonelier in my life.
Yeah.
And I think when you are lonely and you understand loneliness, then you can get down in the space with somebody else who's lonely and say, you know what, I get this. I'm not going to be able to pull you out of it right now, but I get you. So you're not alone. You're not alone.
Yeah. And I completely relate to that. Obviously, with my latest experience of having termination for medical reasons, being awake in the middle of the night, scrolling, just trying to find somebody who said, yeah, I've done that too. And it's, I get it. And it's so powerful, so powerful.
It really is. Yeah.
So healing.
Yeah, it is. And the last time I had a miscarriage, which was in the first lockdown in June, I haven't actually talked about this, but I reached out to a friend who is still a friend, and we're very different, but she's a very religious lady. She's a very, very believes in God and Jesus and the rest of it. And I reached out and I was just lost, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that either. It was just, it's not my beliefs. But I reached out to her and I was just like, am I going to lose this baby? I'm asking questions of anyone who could just give me some reassuring answer. You've been there, haven't you? That whole, well, it might not be me. It might not be the case. It might not be going wrong. That desperate stage where you're just reaching out, and when you come across somebody who just says, you know what, I've been there, I've been through this, I understand it. Yeah, it doesn't take away your problem, but you're just not alone anymore.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
So let's go back. So talk me through your journey. I know that your younger years were particularly difficult for you.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about your life growing up.
So I'm one of 4 girls, 2 older sisters who were from my dad's first marriage. My dad was a professional musician and a singer, very, very talented, very clever man. But because of his traumatic childhood, he was just a post-war baby, much younger than the others. He married very young. He was 18 when he had my 2 older sisters. And that didn't last very long. And he met my mum and we came along later. Now, what I've since discovered is that first marriage broke down because of my dad's drinking.
Okay.
She was a very quiet lady, and his lifestyle just didn't match hers. She was there at home bringing up 2 babies and he was out pub and club singing and drinking. And when he met my mum, and it was mid-70s, they lived a very kind of, the peace life and traveling all over, and she was more than happy, child-free, more than happy to join in with that lifestyle and go and support him around the pubs and the clubs. So when I was born, and I'm the oldest of the 2 of us, my dad was still singing on pubs and clubs, but they had also bought a pub and started to run it, and with that came all sorts of pressures for them, and both of them were very sociable, and alcohol just took them in. It just took, like it could anybody, like it did me. Working in the pub, using tips to buy a drink and socializing, then my dad going out. So it was a very alcohol fueled childhood. It did not feel abnormal, and I know that you'll get that. It did not feel strange, it did not feel weird, and the way I talk about it sometimes is quite detached because that was my normal life. But I guess looking back from a very, very young age, I remember very big arguments and a lot of violence, never aimed at me or my sister, but I certainly saw a lot of very big, violent arguments, and injuries. And I quickly adopted this role of protection over my sister, who was 16 months younger than me. And that would involve all sorts of things. So recognizing very early that maybe my dad had had too much to drink and being quite on guard about how he might react, recognizing that my mum was getting upset and looking back probably suffering from depression herself, and trying to fix things. I became the fixer, and whether that meant picking up broken glass from a very young age and sweeping it away, or whether it meant trying to literally get in the middle of them and resolve arguments. But that was my childhood role. What I realise now is that's probably why I developed an anxiety disorder in my adult life, because obviously it wasn't very stable. I felt very loved. I was a very, very loved child. And I really, truly believe now they did their best with the tools that they had. But it was a frightening place to be. And it was an embarrassing place to be as well. I held a lot of shame for years. The neighbours could hear what was going on. My friends could hear what was going on. I couldn't have certain people round because of the environment that I'd grown up in. It meant that there were many troubles. So I didn't have what the other children had. That led to some bullying. But I was still really protective. And I know I've kind of flipped through it there, but I'm trying to kind of put in a nutshell.
What do you mean by you held embarrassment?
So I went to friends' houses and I would watch their family lives. They were no more loved or cared about than me, but it was too normal for me. So I remember going to a friend's house and knocking on the door, and the whole family was sat around the table with party hats on, celebrating the cat's birthday, I believe, or the dog's, one of the pets anyway. And I remember thinking, well, this is really weird, but it was looking back, it was a family thing to do.
Yeah.
And they were doing it clearly for the kids. But I remember, and I was probably maybe 8 years old, and thinking then, well, this is really weird. Like, what's going on here? In my house, we're having parties. We're like up till midnight and playing the guitar and dancing on a weekend, not celebrating the cat being 3, That's not what my parties look like.
Lucky cat, by the way. Don't say that. My cats might overhear and start wanting birthday parties. They are close. But I thought, like, that definitely wouldn't have happened in my house, a birthday party for the cat. But, like, as an adult, I look at that and I think, oh, that's really cute.
It's cute. It's sweet. And I think for me, that's what some of the things that started to make me feel, well, I don't kind of have that at home. My family life's different. And I wouldn't say I thought it was bad, because I didn't. I was in it and it was normal, but it was different. And that stopped me from kind of being open about things. I started to hide things, started to cover things up. I wouldn't tell my mum and dad about parents' evening because I didn't want them smelling of wine when they're in front of the teachers. And it became shameful. I'm no longer ashamed of it, but as a child, it became shameful.
How did you, I'm curious, I'm really curious to try and understand better. So how did you, maybe you don't remember, I don't know, arrive at knowing that if your parents came to parents' evening smelling of alcohol, that wasn't a good thing?
I think it was comparing myself to other people and seeing what their parents looked like, what they wore, what they acted like, and just feeling that mine were different. And that was fine, and that was fun behind closed doors. And I actually enjoyed quite a lot of the time with my mum and dad. They were great fun. But in kind of a school environment, when they would be the ones who had gone to the pub before kind of a concert and then would have maybe wine afterwards, and maybe I could tell they'd had a drink.
Yeah.
And looking back, probably nobody else would have even noticed. It was just my perception of the situation. And, you know, I became quite, does anyone know? Very aware of what people might think of me. Yeah, but I think it came more from the comparison of what I thought was normal. I'm not sure there is a normal now, by the way.
Neither am I. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced, but that doesn't take away from the fact that as children, you do become aware of, you start to sort of become aware of what's socially, or what seems to be socially acceptable and what isn't as well, right? So the only thing I can compare that to, my parents didn't have drink in the home, but my father's father did. So my grandfather was an alcoholic, and I remember being stood, I must have been about, I don't know, 13, and I was stood up on the corner near the corner shop with my friends, and that side of the family was quite well known because they had family businesses, and we were stood there, and his car was obviously blind drunk. His car came screeching up onto the pavement, almost mounted the wall, you know, this little wall, brick wall, this small town. Mounted, I'm laughing, it's not funny, but it mounted this curb. Anyway, and he got out, and he was sort of quite well to do, and he'd gone, "Hello, lovely," and gone storming into the shop. And my friend said, "Do you know him?" And I said, no, I don't know who that is. And I remember thinking, and I didn't know, and it's interesting you say that, I didn't know why, but all I knew was I need to just say, no, I don't know who that is. And it was my grandfather, like it was my grandfather, right? So I could detach from it because it wasn't my parents, because I couldn't, you know, if it had been my mum or dad, I wouldn't be able to say, no, I don't know who they are. But, you know, I could have just, in my mind, I was like, I could just pass him off as someone else's granddad, you know, like I didn't know why I needed to do that, but I did. And then he came out with a big bottle of whiskey, got in the car, and then charged off, you know. And they're like, "I'm sure that's your granddad." I said, "Oh no, I don't think it was. I think you must have misseen," you know.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And I think for me it was very similar to that. I mean, my mum was not alcoholic, I don't think. I think my mum was if you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah.
And she was happy to live my dad's lifestyle, and it fit in. And you know, it's important for me to say as well, probably a good 70% of the time there was no problem. My mum was working, she was a hairdresser, my dad was doing what he was doing. But when there were problems, there were big problems. And I think some of the recognising it wasn't right probably came from them, because in their arguments they would argue about my dad's drinking.
Yeah.
And it would be, "Oh, you're just an alcoholic." And I think, you know, I would kind of pick up on that. And certainly on my mum's side, my nana on my mum's side and my auntie who's on my mum's sister, I would hear them talking about my dad in a negative way, or, you know, he's dragged their mum down, or, you know, whatever would be used. And actually you would jump straight into defense mode. No, he hasn't. They're both the same as a child. And we would actively argue that they were both the same, because we didn't want to think of this wonderful dad figure who was fun, who did teach me the guitar, who was very clever, who was a musician, all those things, wasn't being liked. So I think that was really, it's so hard to find that balance of, you know, actually not being happy and being scared and being afraid and all those things, but then not being able to say that for fear of judgment. And that's when you start to hide and feel the shame and the embarrassment.
And then, so just kind of talk me through, so you were at home till, when were you at home till?
19. So I was 19, my sister was 17. Here's another thing, you see. So they were very wild, like I say, my parents, and they just got up one day and announced that they were moving out. Yes, you heard me right. They were moving out.
They were moving out.
Yeah. So we were in we're in a 3-bedroom house, and we'd been on a council estate since I was maybe 7 or 8, because through the pubs and so on, unfortunately, my dad had gone bankrupt, and we'd lost the pubs and ended up moving, which actually spurred on a whole load of, that's probably the most turbulent time, 7 to 19, if I think about it. And yes, so I get to 19, my sister was 17, and my mum and dad just said, right, we've found a 1-bedroomed house and we're moving out. You're going to have to move out. So both of us just went, oh, okay. And that was it. We just all three of us left the family home and went into our own separate houses.
Like disbanded.
Yeah. They moved into their 1 bed. It was clear we weren't going with them. And we went
in the cupboard.
in,
I started to live in the cupboard.
Yeah.
So, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And so you said, oh my gosh. And, I'm laughing. I'm not laughing at your situation, but, we've had other conversations about life stuff, and you just think it's just nothing. Life is just crackers, isn't it, sometimes? And you kind of go, when you're younger, these things happen and you just kind of go with it. And then it's only when you get a bit older, you look back and you're like, that was a bit mad.
Yeah, and the thing is, you're so resilient and you're so used to kind of dealing with difficulty and adversity that you just take that other thing in your stride. You're just like, oh, okay, I've got to find somewhere to live. So I ended up moving in with a boyfriend and then marrying him far too young because I was in that situation of, I need some more stability. I mean, I married him when I was like 20 or 21. It lasted for about 8 months.
Did you know, it makes perfect sense to me that would be, or could be, a natural step from that situation, though.
Yeah. It caused a lot of problems actually, because my sister saw that as me abandoning. It's funny when we speak about it now, she saw that as me abandoning her because I moved out first. So that we were all in the house, we got the news, I moved out because I had a boyfriend. And then she was left behind, still dealing with the turbulent home life. And we've spoken many times over this, and I always saw myself as this protector, and yet she would say, you left me. Oh,
wow.
Yeah.
And you said that the ages between 7 and 19 actually were the most turbulent times. What was going on for you during those years?
So I was a really good child. Anything that was given to me to learn, I would learn. I've excelled in maths, I excelled in music, excelled in science, and I, to please them all the time. My sister, not so much. She wasn't as academic as I was, and she was a little bit naughtier and got up to no good. So a lot of the attention was diverted to her. So in reality, I was getting away with murder, actually, because I was seen as this good girl. But actually what I was doing is going out, sneaking out the house in the middle of the night, taking drugs. And when I say drugs, I mean, it was at the time cannabis, and then I did go on to speed for a while, doing that around, 17, 18, all just dabbling, but nonetheless potentially dangerous. And dealing with these arguments and the fights, and all the while drinking with my friends every single weekend on the street, 2 litres of cider, getting drunk, park benches, snogging boys, you name it, just getting up to stuff that I probably didn't need to be getting up to at that age, if I'm honest. And then I kind of, all the while, was holding down, and it's the story of my life actually, I'm holding down this perfect outward image. So, straight A's in school, goes on to sixth form. I actually burnt out in the first term of sixth form. I was going to college in the town centre, and it was about an hour's bus ride from where I lived, and by Christmas I'd actually dropped out of college, and that's the first time I recognised I had a mental health problem, but I didn't recognise it at the time. It's now retrospectively, but that was stress of trying to be this perfect child, doing the travel, having the part-time job. And I ended up going to work then for 2 years before I went back to sixth form again. And that's been kind of a pattern as well. I go off, I burn out, period of really not being well, and then boom, back in, let's do something just as challenging. It's so I think when I say challenging, I mean in terms of that was my parents' heaviest drinking period. That was when the most fights and arguments would happen. But we were also living in, like I say, in this estate, which was a rough estate, and I'm not ashamed of my upbringing whatsoever in that sense. I had some great friends from there, but it was dog eat dog. I mean, the first day that we moved in there, we both got beaten up, me and my sister, on the way to the shop by an older girl who pushed us into the building site and gave us both a big slap. And we both ran home crying. And we'd come from this background where we lived in pubs, but it was quite, we were quite well respected as a family because my mum and dad owned these pubs, and we went to a nice school. We got on this estate and both of us go home with slap marks all over our faces and dirt where we'd been pushed into the ground. And it was the first time really my dad said, you can't, you come home like this now, and this is going to happen to you too for the rest of the time we're here, and we're going to be here for a while. You get back out there. And it actually sent us out to have a fight with this girl, physical fight. And we were 7 and 5.
How did that go?
Did
you go back out? Did you go back out?
We went back out. Yeah, I remember crying and feeling really shaky and going back out. And there was a bit of pushing and shoving. I mean, we were kids, but there was a bit of pushing and shoving and don't do that to me and a bit of hair pulling. And then very quickly it was accepted, they're just as tough and rough as us, it's fine. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, the things that go on when we're younger.
Yeah. And it was, it was different. Never had to do it again, but it just my dad had come from that. He'd come from that background, so he knew that unfortunately this was a place, the kids were feral. We were all feral. So if we were going to survive, we were going to have to do it their way.
And you were 7 and 5. Get back out there.
7 and 5. Get back out there and stand up for yourselves. Yeah.
Oh, my little heart for your little 7-year-old self.
Yeah. And I can kind of remember it. I'm kind of thinking back to it. I kind of remember it. But I certainly remember the lesson of, you stand up for yourself or you're just going to get destroyed. And that was a physical thing where I grew up. You stood up for yourself. And I probably got into maybe 3 or 4 fights through the years, physical fights as a child, most of them protecting my sister from older girls.
And it's funny when you're the older one, isn't it? And you go into like a protection mode for your younger sibling. It's you suddenly assume a far more adult role than you ever should have to. But we do it, right? I was the oldest with 3 younger brothers. I remember marching down to the lower school and getting a boy that was beating him up by the neck, picking him up so his feet was hanging off the floor, slamming him up against the wall. Said, "You ever touch my brother again, I'll kill you." That's what I said to him.
Yeah.
I was like 13. This kid was 11, like his feet hanging off the floor. They never touched him again. But it's just the things you do for your siblings.
And there was only 16 months between us as well, so we were really close. We still are quite close, but obviously our lives have gone different ways. But in terms of that, there was, they called us the Dolly Sisters, or the Dolly Sisters are out, because we were always together. We were everywhere together. And we were best friends. So, but a lot of that came from the shared secret.
Yeah. So you very quickly get exited from the family home, and oh gosh, I don't really know how else to call it. And then you go and get married very quickly. So talk me through the next steps, and I'd like to talk a bit more about your journey and how drink ended up featuring in your life as an adult. And tell me about that part of your journey.
Okay, so by the time I was 19 and moved out, I worked behind a bar. I was a student. I'd gone back to I was going back to university, or going to university, should I say. So naturally, you're in a bit of a boozy culture anyway there with the university life. And my first husband was not a big drinker at all, but liked red wine. And red wine had been the family drink as well with my mum and dad as I grew up. So I probably drank red wine on a Friday and a Saturday night in the house with him. Now, because we got married so young, and I was a student and he was a nurse at the time, he was a renal nurse, that was our income. So we couldn't afford to kind of go out partying the same as maybe some of our friends did. So very quickly, drinking in the house became quite normal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of my best friends at the time moved in with us to help pay with the rent. So to pay the rent, so there was us two owned the house, and she paid us a rent to live with us, so we could afford our mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like half of friends, you know, like the three of us. We'd drink together, we'd watch TV, we'd have a laugh, we'd go out together, and
Mm-hmm.
we just became this weird little threesome. If I'm honest, it wasn't a relationship threesome, but a weird little friendship threesome. And she liked red wine as well. So that's where it started. That's where it became acceptable to drink every Friday, Saturday night, and large quantities, because we'd get drunk together watching Britain's Got Talent or whatever was on at the time. It wasn't the X Factor, I don't know what it was called at the time, but watching stuff like that, it just started off very innocent and very normal. And because I'd grown up in pubs and then I was working in them, I was good at it. I was good at integrating and mixing with customers, and you know, letting them buy me a drink and having one behind the bar, and then staying afterwards for after time and things like that. I was just good at it. I guess looking back, the first time I realised I had a problem with drink, because I've never been able to stop once I started. But again, it's looking back at the time I want to recognise this, was my graduation from university. So I'd finished the exams at lunchtime. It was my last day, and I was supposed to be going home for a meal with two friends with my then husband. And looking back, I was just playing house, you know, like which 19-year-olds having dinner parties? Do you know what I mean? It's not, I was playing house. That's what I was doing, 20, however old I was, 20, 21 maybe. And all my friends were going out to celebrate the end of university, and I wanted to go. And so I phoned him up and said, I'll be a few hours. That was at lunchtime, and I rocked up asleep on Victoria train station in Manchester at 5 a.m. and he had to come and collect me. And I'd gone home in my friend's jacket. My mobile phone battery had run out, and I had photographs on my phone of people I didn't recognise. I couldn't remember it. And I had to go back the next day to swap coats, and between three of us, we'd had 9 bottles of red wine.
Wowzers.
Yeah. And that's the first blackout big event I remember of many, 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 many. And I told that story. I wore it like a badge of honour. So if I fast forward, all that's happened, I then remarried. We actually separated, went our separate ways. We were just too young. There was nothing wrong with him, nothing wrong with me particularly, just too young. Met somebody else, and he was a drinker. And it was like a match made in hell. When we drank, we fought. It was violent. It was just the same as it had been. And then I ended up having 2 children with him. And drinking in the house was a thing. And he actually attacked me one evening because he thought I'd been having an affair. We were living out in Cyprus. He had my phone. He was looking through my messages, and it was a very innocent. If I'm not innocent, I tell you I'm not innocent, you know. But with him, with this, it was a friend called Helen, and he ended up hitting me in the leg, hitting me in the face, and then he's now 15, but he was then 3, saw it. And at that point, I thought, no, I'm leaving him. I'm leaving him. So just to kind of put all this in context, around the same time, so I travelled back to England with my children, left him there. My dad became very, very ill and then passed away around the same time. So I didn't leave him. I kind of thought, I can't deal with all this in one go. And I went back. It got worse. The violence got worse. And I did actually end up leaving him about 6 months later. That's the kind of first big rock bottom I remember, where my drinking became alone drinking to take the edge off what I was doing. Any excuse to just go out and have some wine and to take the edge off that pain of the loss of my dad, the marriage breakdown. I felt like a failure because I'd always said that if I had children, I wouldn't let them grow up in the household I'd grown up in. I would fight for my marriage no matter what. And yeah, I was just shattered and broken. And then the girl that had lived with me with my first husband, she had developed a drink problem and actually ended up dying in an accident around the same time, drink-related accident.
Oh my goodness.
And of course, all these people around me looking back, I've got all these benchmarks that seemed worse than me. So I'm not seeing that I'm just the same. It could have been me that did that. It could have been me that had the drink-related accident. But no, I've got all these people that are worse. And I say worse with, air commas.
Yeah.
He's worse than me as my benchmark. So,
okay.
Yeah, I was in a really bad place at that point. Yeah.
Such a lot happening to you and around you, all in such a condensed space of time.
Yeah, and all the while, and this is the thing that, when I came back from Cyprus with my children, I returned, my father had died, my marriage had broken down, I had nowhere to live, and I had no job, and I had no money. So I was in masses of debt as well from credit cards, spending on credit cards. And I remember sitting on the floor in my then rented front room and just looking around and thinking, what is the point? Like, I've got nothing, I can't do anything. And my mum actually turned up at the door and said, and it's very funny because I put it on my Instagram, just get up and put one foot in front of the other. I don't care how you do it, just move forwards. And she dragged me up off the floor and said, your kids aren't going to go to school unless you find them a school. You're not going to be able to pay for a car unless you get a job. You're not going to be able to find a house unless you get a job. Get on the phone. You're a qualified teacher and get your job. And I did that day. I phoned up and I got myself some temp work working in a school. Yeah.
One foot in front of the other, right? And do you know, when you're in the darkest of spaces, and I've been in a couple myself, sometimes that first step is just, it feels so hard, doesn't it? But that one step is all it takes to just start to go in a different direction. But it can feel like you're literally stepping on the moon, big.
It really does. And it was a physical thing for me, because when she walked in my house, I was sat on the floor in front of the radiator with my two children running around somewhere. They were babies still, 3 and 5 maybe. And I couldn't see. I couldn't see past the empty front room with no furniture, the credit card bills. It felt like everything was caving in on me. I wanted my dad. I just wanted my even though I'd been scared a lot in my childhood, he was also massive security for me, my dad. He was very, very strong. And all I wanted was my dad to tell me it was going to be all right and that I'd be able to do it. And for the first time, I felt very, very alone. Yeah.
So you say this is one of your rock bottom moments.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that, because I know that sometimes people say, oh, that was a rock bottom, but it wasn't the rock bottom. And so talk to me about your experience around that for you.
So for me at that point, I really felt hopeless. And the only thing keeping me from doing anything harmful to myself was the fact that I had these 2 young children that depended on me. But for the first time in my life, there were cracks showing. So, I wasn't getting on to feeding them on time, and the story was caving, and the routine had gone, and it just, I could tell that I wasn't right. I wasn't okay. But when I started to kind of pick myself back up and do the things that I needed to do, and get a job and move back into the house that I was renting, all of those things that I needed to do, when I started to do them, I just started to feel okay again. So I didn't really do much about it. I went to the GP, said I didn't feel well, got put on antidepressants. That was about it. And at the time, I just kind of got on with it. There was no self-development work went on. There was no self-care. I certainly didn't stop drinking. In fact, my children were then going to their dads 6 days a week, every 2 weeks. So I was having them for 8 and he was having them for 6. And for the 6 days, although I was holding down a full-time teaching job, I was partying every night in that time. So looking back, the drinking was probably quite bad at that point, but I was using it as my mum time, and then I was being quite sensible for 8 days, So I was 6 days wild, 8 days mum, 6 days wild, 8 days mum. And I met someone else. And he's my third husband, my current husband, the father of my youngest child. And, you know, it's worked out. Mm-hmm. He's not a drinker. He didn't like partying. He was everything I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I sort of went for him because of that, I don't know. Whether it was a subconscious thing, whether we've become that together, I honestly don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a baby, and I'm quite a bit older than him. I was 37 when I had my baby, and he didn't have any children. And we'd planned to have 2 before I was 40. And then in October 2018, I had another miscarriage. I had a miscarriage, sorry, not another, I had a miscarriage. And I had the miscarriage. I went to the hospital for my 12-week scan. I was just about starting to feel a little bit better, you know, from the morning sickness and everything. And I went in there and she said, how are you feeling? I said, yeah, I feel okay. I've been really, really poorly and tired, but I'm feeling a little bit better. I've started to come out of it. And she switched the screen off. And it hadn't even occurred to me that there could be anything wrong. It just hadn't occurred to me. And she looked and she said, I'm so sorry, you know, that the heartbeat has stopped. And I just wanted to know when did this happen? And she said, well, it looks about 2 days ago.
Oh.
And she said, there's no sign that you're going to miscarry just yet, as in you're going to lose the baby. You need to go home and think about what you're going to do. We're just going to get some counselling. And it took me off. And I was in shock. I didn't cry, I didn't do anything. I just kept saying, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. The same walls had gone up every time. And I sat in the room and she said to me, you've got 3 options. You can have the medical intervention, you can have the surgical evacuation, or you can wait till this happens naturally. And I'd already stopped drinking, it's important for me to say, in the August, because I'd actually thrown a sandwich at my husband's head in an argument on August bank holiday. And he'd said, look, this is not happening. You need to sort yourself out. You need to stop. This is before I got pregnant.
Yeah.
And so I said, yeah, I'm going to stop. And I did, because I could tell he was serious, and I thought I'll take a break. And then when I found out I was pregnant, I took my eye off the ball a little bit with that and just thought, oh, well, I'm not going to drink now anyway. 9 months without a drink, I'll be fine. So during that time, I'd already been stopped drinking before I got pregnant. And I just sat in the chair and I said, I want it out. I want it out now. And I can't explain that unless you've been through it and you can feel the same. I don't know. Not everybody does. Some people say they wanted to hold on. I didn't. I wanted it gone. I wanted all memory erased. I wanted it to just not be there. I just wanted to move on as quickly as possible. And it was Friday, and they said the earliest we can do your operation is Monday. So I went straight to the pub. And that's where it started again. That's my second rock bottom. And it started again. Drink. Had the operation. I lost a lot of blood. I was very unwell. Drink. Breakdown. By the June of the following year, I wasn't working. I'd been in work, but then I'd gone off again sick because I couldn't cope. I kept having suicidal thoughts. I was having nightmares. Looking back, it's probably PTSD, because I was having nightmares that my children were being abducted, and violent dreams about them, violent dreams. I was waking up sweating and screaming. And that was the worst point in my adult life, the single worst point. And I just sat there and I was a mess. And I phoned up my best friend, Lisa, who's one of the co-founders of Be Sober. She'd already been stopped drinking. And I said, I need your help. I need to take a break from alcohol for a month. And that was in June 2019. And from that point, yes, I've had another miscarriage since then, sober, with a different mindset, with more resilience, with more tools. It was still painful, but I can honestly say stopping drinking changed my life. Yeah.
Gosh, you've been through so much. I was holding my breath as you're saying, telling me that last bit, obviously, because that part really resonates with me also.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking then, I hope I'm all right talking
no,
to you.
Of course you
very
are.
Recent for you.
No, of course you are. And I resonate with parts of it. It's different. But that nightmares in the night, I can really relate to. And having, you're saying you have dreams of your children being abducted. I don't have living children this was, well, trying to be my first, but I was having nightmares of being pregnant and then someone just stealing my baby out of my pregnant body, just stealing it. So very similar, this sort of it just being taken from you, right? And this was wild in the night, and I was sweating and kicking and screaming and crying, and it is PTSD after loss, and it does take its toll. And I can also I hear you when you say, if I go back to my younger Emma, who had people die around me, lots of things all happen, and I was off the rails. Mine thing was never drink, it was drugs.
Yeah.
The rails with drugs, right? To cope, because I had no other tools to cope. And I said to somebody just recently, I said, if this had happened to a younger Emma, I don't even want to know what that would have looked like.
Yeah.
Because and the truth is, it's not because I was a bad person. I just didn't know any other way to cope. And this experience, I do know different ways to cope, and it doesn't make it easier. It just means that we come at it in a slightly different way.
Yeah, definitely more resilient, certainly, but resilient in a real way, not in a I'm just going to black it out way. Because when I had the second miscarriage in June, very similar circumstances, but this time I thought I feel too well, and I've said I need a scan, and I found out that way. So a little bit earlier, but similar circumstances. And it's funny because yesterday I got a letter through, and I've been having blood tests to find out about my miscarriages. And yesterday I took a knock, actually, because I found out that my miscarriages were both caused by something present in my blood, which is called lupus anticoagulant. And I'm 43 now, and I've nearly 43. And I've found out that both were preventable. And that was really tough yesterday. Really tough. I had a tough day. But also I had a tough day, and I was able to sit in the tough day and go, okay, I've got the news. How do I feel about that? How can I process it? I'm okay. And I think the reason it's so hard is because I've come to accept that I probably won't go on to have more children now out of choice, because I don't want to put myself through that again. I don't know if my mental health would take another loss or another knock as well. So as sad as it is, I think for me now, I've come to the point where I think, right, what's going to be best for me is to not go through this again, even though potentially it was preventable.
Oh, I'm so sorry you had that news. I mean, it's fertility stuff. It's so deeply personal and deeply complicated for every woman I speak to. And what I would like to kind of go back to a bit is that I was able to sit with how I felt, and that part. And I do think that's a huge part when you learn tools to help you process. And this is what I talk about quite often. We can either cope or we can process.
Yeah.
Right? They're the two avenues. But often, until you've learned tools to process and feel, your only option is to cope. And the only way you can cope is the only way you've had modeled to you, that you've seen, or that you've used to escape.
Yeah.
For me, it was always put my trainers on and run and get out of my head, get out of my body, just whatever it is, whether we go to a different country, take drugs, do whatever it is, right? Escape. I've got to escape out of this. I've got to run. And it's really interesting for me how that can change when you learn ways to process, and that desire still comes up in me to run sometimes. I think, oh no, that's it, just get the stuff, pack the bags, let's go. Don't know where I'm going, but somewhere, anywhere.
Not here. I get it.
But it's that no, whoa, like like holding back the horses. Hang on a minute, let's just sit still. And you can only do that when you know that there's a safe way to do that. And that's the the hard but the magical part of this learning that I've certainly been learning. I find it incredibly powerful, painful, but powerful.
Yeah, I'm with you completely. And yeah, I get it. And going through the things that I've been through in my life, they may sound tough, but I'll say, you know, I know we're coming to the end now, but it's what I will say to round off what I've said is that going through those things is what's made me the person that's now able to deal with and process the things that I need to deal with and process. So I'm actually, as much as I say that's my normal, it's my normal, I'm not detached from it like it might sound. I'm just accepting of it, and it's been a huge part of what's made me me. So yeah, I'm grateful for it in a weird way.
No, I get it. I get it. How you sit there, and it's funny when you have conversations with people who kind of get where you're coming from, we all end up kind of sitting there going, I'm kind of grateful for, you're not grateful or you don't feel like you deserve what happened, but you're grateful for what you've learned as a result of the experiences that you've gone through. And that's kind of the feeling of it. I mean, this is, you know, nobody ever sits there and says, oh no, I think I'd like all of these things to happen to me, please. Yes, I'll order them. I'll have it, and I'll have it delivered to the door tomorrow. Like, of course not. Yeah. That's not what this is about. And it's not necessarily saying that we'd take that takeaway order and order them again either. But you know, like, you know, you wouldn't pick up the takeaway order now at 43 or at me 40 this year and say, yes, as a 40-year-old Emma, I'd like to do them all again, please. No, but I wouldn't necessarily change what I've gone through because of what I now learn and who I am for it. Right. And
exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your story, your life experiences with me.
I'm sorry it's been so packed in. I really am grateful that you've let me on and let me share and wanted me on to share. I'm really grateful. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you so much for your time.